Good to roll.
Again, I think Sheriff Kirkmeyer sent out a press release through the PIO, through Morton County here, so I'm not really going to read that statement. If you have any questions about what occurred today at our two protest incidents, I'd be happy to answer those questions.
There were two separate protest incidents?
Correct. There were two separate protest incidents today. The first one began about 5 a.m. this morning. We had approximately 14 protesters that were criminally trespassing on a location along the pipeline route in southern Morton County. There was a vehicle that they had brought to that location. They disabled that vehicle by slashing all 4 tires of that. And then 4 of the protesters actually attached themselves to that vehicle in various ways. 2 of them with bike locks to one of the running boards. One had used what's called a protester device that attached himself to the steering wheel. And the 4th one actually attached himself through a hole in the passenger door to a barrel of concrete inside the passenger seat of that vehicle. So there's four individuals that were attached themselves to that vehicle, along with 10 other protesters that were standing around that vehicle, attempting to create other protester devices and create more issues for law enforcement when they responded to try not to remove them.
Why is this being termed a riot today?
It's being termed a riot today basically because these individuals know that they're criminally trespassing. They know they're engaged in a protest that's unlawful. This has been going on for at least 2 months now. It's all, basically it's from the same locations that these people are coming from. They know what they can legally and what they can't legally do. We've explained that over and over and over to them. And they continue to engage in these situations where they're unlawfully present on private property. They're creating chaos actually for law enforcement. We have to respond by creating a dangerous environment for us when you have people that are attaching themselves to equipment. Law enforcement has to go down there, use power tools, dangerous equipment to remove these people from those devices because they're very difficult to defeat. And it puts not only the officer at risk, but also that protester. And they're intentionally doing that. They're intentionally putting themselves in these devices. They can remove themselves if they choose, but they choose not to. So again, they're engaging in conditions that has been identified that are unlawful in Morton County.
What do you do with 83 prisoners with limited jail capacity?
The Morton County Sheriff's Office is working with the other jails in the area to house all these suspects, these prisoners that have been arrested today.
You were on the front line. What was it like when the protesters interacted with law enforcement?
At the first sight about 5 a.m. this morning, the protesters that were there were very verbally abusive to law enforcement. They were challenging us. They were making statements, basically, anti-law enforcement type statements, and they were challenging us basically at that location. And we successfully arrested the 10 people that were milling about around that disabled vehicle, and then ultimately we arrested all 4 of the people that had attached themselves to that vehicle as well, without injuring any of them. And after that incident was basically being wrapped up, there was another protest incident that occurred at another site along the pipeline, again on private property, along the pipeline route. Same group of individuals coming from the same camps from southern Morton County walked at least about 3 miles along the pipeline route to get to a location where there was pipeline workers, where law enforcement had staged to stop them from getting access to the equipment that they wanted to basically damage and destroy. That was the purpose, to get to that equipment to stop the pipeline work. And at that point in time, law enforcement confronted them, stopped them from advancing towards that equipment. We actually heard in the crowd, flank, flank. They were trying to flank our location. It's a very rural, very open location. It's all pasture land. And they were able to flank our location because we didn't have enough law enforcement down there. They got around our flank, continued to march about another mile before we were able to get law enforcement ahead of them and stop them. And once we had law enforcement in front of them, they continued to challenge us and come towards us. So at that point in time, we were at risk from a growing crowd. There was continual people that were coming down that pipeline route, coming towards the crowd that we had there, estimated to be at least 150 to 200 people. And law enforcement, we didn't have enough people out there to handle that many people. So we were outnumbered. So to protect ourselves, we utilized some less lethal munitions today to protect ourselves. And as we did that, they continued to advance on us, but we were able to control that with the law enforcement we had there, and we began making arrests. And ultimately, there was 83 arrests today.
Out of those 83, how many
were from out of town? And do you think that is making the situation worse? Or?
You know, I don't have an estimate of how many were from out of town. That would have to be a question for the jail staff. I wasn't there when they were all processed. You know, obviously there's people from all over the country that are here, and we will deal with individuals that break the law, whether they're from North Dakota or they're not from North Dakota, the same way. If they break the law, they're going to be placed under arrest.
Does the case of because I've heard that there were some journalists who were arrested in this, some press. Is the case of Amy Goodman set any precedent for what might happen? I mean, her charges were dismissed. So, what is the purpose, I guess, of arresting press when the precedent is that the charges will be dismissed?
Again, the individuals that were arrested today were all criminally trespassing. It was identified to them that they were criminally trespassing. They were all placed under arrest for those violations. In addition to that, we arrested some people for fleeing law enforcement because once they were placed under arrest, they began to flee from us. A few individuals were arrested for resisting arrest because they resisted our arrest out there. In addition to that, engaging in a riot. Numerous people were arrested for engaging in a riot. Whether they were press or not, they were criminally present at a location where they could not be lawfully. They made the conscious decision to walk down that pipeline, which is private property, and once they made that decision, they were subject to being placed under arrest for violations of North Dakota state law.
How long did each incident last then, approximately?
The first incident that occurred about 5 a.m. this morning, the majority of law enforcement cleared that after about 2.5 hours. There was a law enforcement contingent that had to stay there for approximately another 4 hours to clear those individuals from those protester devices. The second incident began about 7:30, and we were out there for approximately 5.5, 6 hours to deal with the mass arrests that we made today.
What will happen with some of the press's gear and equipment? Will it be confiscated? What does the rule of law say to looking at the material that's covered with that?
Again, I did get to visit with the jail about that. I don't know how those items were processed. I don't know how that stuff gets processed through the jail here. I'm not an employee of Morton County. Those individuals were arrested in Morton County. That'll be a process that Morton County decides on how that stuff is processed through the jail system. This is an open and active investigation. There were numerous people out there that were not arrested that, through investigation, we could potentially charge. And whether or not that equipment of a so-called press member is seized or not, I can't answer that question. I'm not at liberty to answer that question because I'm not a part of that investigation.
Okay, one more question.
Okay, there was reports of people being maced and beaten with batons, and there's video evidence on Facebook and other social media outlets that prove those allegations. What is your response to that use of force towards people who are praying and walking on land?
I think the sheriff did advise that pepper spray was used today. That was the only type of force that was used besides for people that were resisting arrest. Some of them had to be taken to the ground. Other than that, if you did see batons that were utilized on the front lines, it's basically for security and it's to move people. There was no baton strikes that were done today. It was just the use of some pepper spray and basically to protect law enforcement that was being overwhelmed by a growing mob that was out there today.
I have one question. Were the people, men, women, children, out protesting, and who was mostly arrested?
You know, the majority of the people that were on scene there today were adult men and women. There were some children out there, and these individuals bring their children to these protests for one thing and one thing only. It's so law enforcement really thinks about having to use that force if we have to. They basically are putting their children in harm's way by bringing them to these locations. Not because law enforcement wants to react to them, but just because we can't predict what these protesters are going to do, and we have to react to that to protect ourselves, the citizens of Morton Counties, but also for those people that want to peacefully protest. We're trying to protect their rights as well.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.